In this video, I would like to look at one interesting example of closures in JavaScript. So if we look at this line of code here, so it's basically a function which is called fn. It's called with a string, and then it's chained with another function. The string world is passed in, and then it's chained again, and finally it's called without a parameter, and the output of this should become hello world. And the same goes for this example. So basically chaining the fn function multiple times, and that should build a string like this. Now you could wonder, how is it possible that a string can be built this way? How do we actually build such a string with just function calls? I mean, where is the actual state stored? You could ask. It's actually interesting because this can be achieved with closures. So the definition of closures in JavaScript is that a closure is the combination of a function bundled together with references to its surrounding states. In other words, a closure gives you access to an out-of-function scope from an inner function. In JavaScript, closures are created every time a function is created at function creation time. So if you look at this function here, we have a function called init, and we declare a variable called, we assign it to the string Mozilla, and then we define an inner function which is called display name, and it's actually referencing the outer variable, which is Mozilla. And if I call it here, it actually gives us this name. What's interesting with this is that variables that are defined or assigned within this scope are actually stored in memory. So you can call a function multiple times, and the variables inside of it will be stored. So if we go back to this example, how can we create a function called fn in such a way that it can be chained, and that when it's called without a parameter, it will return a build string? So let's just write this function. So I will define a function, and the name of it will be fn, and it takes in a string. And inside of this function, I want to declare a variable. So this variable will be, I can call it appended, because I know that I will append characters to it. And then I can basically create an object which I will return. So that's the way I can chain the result from this function call. I can chain the result this way. So I will create an object, and I can call it string builder, like this. And this object will also have a method called fn, and it can also take in a string. And here I want to basically check what the parameter is, because if we say that of course I shouldn't forget to return the string builder object like this. So when I call it the first time, I'm taking in this string, the hello string, and I should actually assign it to this variable. So like that. And then the result of this will be the object, and when I call it again, I will actually run this function. So I will run this function with this new string parameter. So here I have to do some things about, I have to check what this parameter is, because if it's not passed, so if it's undefined, like in this case, then I just want to return the appended string. If there is a string as a parameter, if the parameter is a string, I have to check that. So I have to check if the parameter is a string. I will say if the type of this parameter is a string, then I want to append something to this variable. So I want to say, okay, so this variable should now also have an empty, a white space, and it should also have this parameter, so the new string parameter. And then, of course, I have to remember that if it's a string, then I want to continue to return the actual string builder, because I want to be able to continue chaining it. And if it's not a string, meaning if we don't enter this if statement, then I just want to return the appended string. So let me now maybe just comment this out. So I just want to see what happens if I run this function. So if I say hello, what will happen? So what we see is that I'm getting a function. So what I'm getting is a function. And if I then say, okay, fn world, it shouldn't blow up. So this should still work. And as we see, it's still an object. So when I run it, it's still an object with this function. So this means that I basically, if I continue writing something, then it should always return the string builder, and that's because if I want, I can just place a breakpoint. So we might want to see what's happening here. So the first time when I call it, so if you look at the closure, we should be able to see it here. So we can see that the first thing that happens is that we take in the hello string and we append it to this appended variable, and that's why we see in the closure that in the outer closure we see that the value of appended is hello at this point, and the local scope is it has this parameter world, and yeah, it's basically the new string. And when we check if this is a string, it is. That's why we enter this if statement. Then we keep on appending this string. So now we see that now the appended variable is updated, and then we return the string builder. If I now just step into it again, so this is the second time it's called. So at this point, the appended string is now hello world, because now we've made this call, and now we're making this call, right? And we're also calling the function from the string builder. So that's why we're taking in blah blah, and that's also a string, and that's why we append the white space and we append blah blah, and then now appended is hello world blah blah. So we see how the state of this variable is being stored throughout the function calls. And this is a very powerful thing in JavaScript that we can access to our needs. What's interesting here is that I will never reach this line of code, so I will never return the actual string. And the reason for it is that since I'm always passing in strings, I'm always entering this if statement. So I'm never entering the else statement, basically the case when this is not true. So that's why I have to supply something that's not a string. So this is not a perfect thing, because it means I can basically, in theory, I should be able to get a string if I pass in whatever inside of this one. But let's just say, yeah, we pass in nothing, and I want to run this code again. So the same thing, we appended hello, and now we append hello world. And now, after we've appended hello world blah blah, we're now returning this string. And now we see that the value that is returned from the function, or this entire expression, is the appended string. So that's interesting. What happens if we pass in an integer like this? I think it should behave the same way. So yeah, it doesn't really care what you, as long as it's not a string. So if it's like an array or anything, it will return the string. So this is basically a short walkthrough of this interesting concept of closures and how it can be used. This is maybe not the best way to use closures, but I'm certain that you will find many use cases for closures. It's not something that you often think about, but it is something that is very used in JavaScript without even thinking. So you've probably used closures many times without thinking that it's actually a closure. But I think that if you actively encounter an issue where you would like to store something, store a value over time between function calls, then you should know that closures is a good tool in your toolbox. That's all I had to share for this time, and I'll see you in the next video.